Welcome to the ThePPod.
Okay, welcome back everybody to the ThePPod, the partnership podcast from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. Now, I'm in a luxurious position today that I can slightly sit back and let some of my guests take over. And I'm really, really pleased once again to welcome back friend of the podcast, the ThePPod, Jackie Webb, MI trainer. And but also joining with us today is Sharron. Sharron, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Sharron Ricketts. I'm a consultant social worker based in Shepton Mallet.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sharron. Thanks for joining us and welcome along. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
So the plan today is basically to kind of build on the previous podcast that we've recorded with Jackie, and we're really keen to actually see it put into practice. What does it actually look like in terms of MI? We've talked about the sort of the background, the theory, the techniques behind it. So we're going to kind of have a bit of a conversation between the two of you today to really kind of see what that looks like. But before we did, it would be really good to kind of find out a bit about yourself and your role within children's social care, but also about your sort of MI sort of journey and what that's looked like. Because I know you've been doing a lot around MI for the last few years, as have all of children's social care. So can we just start off with that? In terms of your role, what is your role within the children's services? Yeah,
sure. So a consultant social worker is somebody who, in terms of where we sit alongside team managers. That's kind of our place, I guess, if you were looking at the structure chart. Primarily our role is to support all of the workforce in learning and development. So it might be that we are delivering CPDs, our continuous professional development sessions once a week. It might be that we're delivering learning sets, doing colleague listening groups, anything that kind of would be helpful to enhance or develop the learning of our staff. And that includes social workers and non-qualified social workers. We also kind of primarily focus on students and newly qualified social workers who are coming into the profession. We might support them through student placements. We might support them through their assisted and supported year in employment. Yeah, so that's kind of basically our role. And as consultant social workers, there's 2 in each area of Somerset. So there's 8 in total. And then we have Lizzie, who is also a consultant social worker who focuses just on kind of the students and the kind of educative side of things.
Brilliant. Thank you. So I know you've been quite involved with MI since it was first introduced by Jackie within Somerset, going back a few years ago now. Could you just kind of talk us through that? In terms of MI, was it something you were aware of before sort of doing any training around it?
Yeah, so I'd already done some MI training when I trained to be a social worker. So through university, we had those study skills days, and I think it was Jackie actually who came out to university and delivered the session then. However, it was kind of in amongst the rest of a degree, and I kind of heard it, but it didn't really land on me, I guess, as much as I would have wanted it to. And then when I started in Somerset, we did the 3 days motivational interview training. And just like the current model, you do 2 days and then come back and do the 3rd day. And it kind of, I don't know why it landed differently for me when I was then qualified. I think I probably just had a bit more headspace to make sense of what Jackie was saying and the ideas around MI, which really, really fitted with my values and my ethics and the spirit in which I practice. And so it was really nice to have an evidence base, I guess, to say, hey, guess what? This stuff works. And you're not just kind of making it up. There is an actual framework and there is evidence to say that you do get better outcomes if you kind of go with this style of working. So that kind of pipped my enthusiasm for it, and I wanted to know a bit more. And I guess in terms of how I took that learning into embedding it within my practice, first of all, I'd say it takes a long time because although it seems quite simple, it's actually quite difficult to consciously do all, when you purposely want to do it. And it's easy to say, I already do that, because it might be that you have the spirit of MI, and most people do, that I've come across anyway in my working career, but to consciously bring the framework to your forefront and practice that with others doesn't just come naturally. You have to be very kind of conscious. So the things that I would do, I guess, in terms of going to home visits, I would be thinking, why am I going to this home visit today? What's the purpose of it? Where do we need to be? What are we trying to hope? What is this family needing from me? How am I going to frame that? What components of MI am I really going to try and be mindful of today? I wonder how many affirmations I might be able to offer. Or today I'm really just going to focus on listening for change talk. Even if I do nothing else, that's just what I'm going to listen for. So I was just kind of testing myself out, really. And the other thing that I would say that was really, really helpful was that I was around a team who'd also just been recently trained in MI. And that kind of lifted the enthusiasm and the kind of conversations around MI. So we would challenge each other to listen to podcasts, or we would have a theme within our team meeting. Like, so for example, we might say, this week's focus, everyone's going to try and see how many reflections they can offer or listen for change talk. And then we'd come back the next week and see how we did. And that really, when there were times when maybe I was waning a bit and maybe MI wasn't right at the forefront of my thinking, it was for somebody else and they would help to lift me up. So that was really kind of helpful for me.
Jackie and I spoke before about, with MI, it's not one of those things you can go on a day course and come out as an expert, and it very much about it being part of that culture.
Yes.
And that's one of the most important things around it, isn't it? Having that culture of MI within organisations.
Yeah, you have to deliberately find a space to practice, to talk about, to think about, to reflect on. Quite often, this is probably a bit sad to admit, but quite often just as I'm waking up in the morning, I will be thinking about MI, like conversations I might need to have with people, and genuinely because I, really want to help and support. Like, what can I bring to this conversation? How can I support this kind of space that we're going to have later to be the most use for the person that I'm talking to? And I guess as a consultant social worker, a lot of the MI conversations I have are with my colleagues and with newly qualified social workers and students, because I need to elicit from them what they think needs to happen or the direction of travel they want to go in, and for me to be able to go along and guide that where needed.
So what difference have you seen in practice, either with, and you talked about working with colleagues there, or with families that you work with? Have you seen much of a difference from that approach?
Yes, I think so. Again, I suppose going back to my original point, it gives me a framework, I guess, in which to hang my practice on. And so before, when I thought I was doing the right thing, I now know with my MI hat on that I am doing the right thing. So, and I'll see that in the practice of others as well. So in terms of being able to advocate, so I think we've spoken before about conflicts. Sometimes it can be really difficult because we need to trust the process of MI and allow that to evolve, I guess. But we're also competing against plans and timescales and, organisational pressures to get things done. And I think if we can stop and have that pause to consider MI and where we're going, I think that helps to add weight and strength to kind of trusting in the process that the family know best, and it fits within our strengths-based practice of Somerset, and avoids us going into that narrative of doing too, which I know Somerset really want to not go down that pathway.
Are you able to give any sort of examples of where you've seen it be really successful with families that you work with?
I think probably I could talk about a family that I supported when I was a safeguarding social worker, and the parent had come to Children's Social Care to let us know that she was expecting a baby, and she was also struggling with alcohol addiction, and she really wanted the help to stop drinking. But she didn't really know where to start or how to go about that, but knew that she wanted some help. And I guess to try and keep it as concise as possible, over the course of 2 years, which is a long time for Children's Social Care to be involved, we went from periods of sobriety and dry houses and mother and baby units, through the court process. We went through so many hurdles. It was unbelievable, actually, the journey that was taken. But at every single juncture, the mum was the person who was saying what she needed. So she was able to say, actually, I can't stay in this mother and baby unit. Even though I really want to keep my child with me, I can't do that and get dry from alcohol. I can't do the two things together. And what I need to do is end this placement, and I need to go into a dry house for me and be on my own. And at that time, as a social worker, everything on the inside of me was going, no, you need to stay. Like, we want to try and keep you all together. And it took ages to get this funding for you to be able to get this place. And we know that it's going to work. But what I had to do was stop and listen to this mum who was saying, this isn't going to work for me. And it doesn't really matter how much money or effort or time we put into this pathway. It's not going to do it. So I had to have faith that she knew what she needed. And actually, that's what we did. We went with that plan. And we ended up coming out of court and back onto a child in need plan. And we closed. We've been closed for just over a year. And mum still messages me and she sends me pictures of her sobriety badges. And she's been alcohol free for 2 years. And what she says to me is that you always had faith, Sharron. She says, you always believed in me. And no matter how bad things got, our relationship kind of stayed. And that's because I did believe in her. I've never believed in anybody more, actually. She was so determined that she was going to reach her goal. And we just needed to help guide and facilitate for that to happen, really. And I think that if we didn't have the MI framework, that would have made those conversations and those times where I needed to really advocate for that mum so much harder, because I would have felt that I was a bit on my own.
And also that sort of authoritarian approach, isn't it? Of we've got a plan in place and you're not willing to do the plan.
Yeah.
So therefore it's all breaking down, as opposed to that relationship, as Jackie and I have talked about several times now, and the importance of that relationship and our role within that to like say, work with rather than doing to.
Yeah. It really was that. And I definitely would say there were times where I felt really worried, thinking, oh my goodness me, I don't know if this is going to work or not. But I just had to have faith, because I knew, even though at times every fibre of my being just wanted to say, no, you just need to do X, Y, and Z. That's what I really, really wanted to say. But I knew deep down that wouldn't have worked. So I needed to quieten that down and kind of lift the voice of the mum, and it worked.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for sharing that. It was really good to kind of hear how it works in practice. And talking about how things actually work in practice, that's what today's episode is all about. And it's time to bring back into the conversation our friend of the podcast, Jackie, who is going to have now a conversation with Sharron using MI. Now, just before we get into this, I just want to be clear that this has not been planned in any way. It's not been scripted in any way. Obviously, Sharron knew that she was coming along today to do this podcast and to speak with Jackie, but Jackie has no awareness of what Sharron's going to talk about. And so at this point, I can now sit back a little bit and hand over to both Jackie and to Sharron to actually sort of demonstrate how everything we've been talking about so far can actually be put into practice. So, Jackie, over to you.
Okay, so Sharron, what would you like to talk about today?
I'd like to talk about my fitness routine, if I could.
Something about your fitness.
Yeah, so as you know, I've said to you before, I like running and I like doing CrossFit. They're equally quite hard for me, but I want to be good at both of them. And I'm really... And I used to be able, I guess what I'm trying to say is I used to be able to run 3 times a week and go to the gym 4 times a week. But I just, and that used to be because I would get up in the morning and I would go training at 6 a.m. and then I would train after work. So I could do like double trainings on some days. So then I could still have rest days. But for whatever reason, I just can't seem to make that happen at the moment, and it's quite frustrating.
Yeah, definitely, because fitness is so important for you. So you're feeling a little bit frustrated, and you can't quite work out what's happening.
No, and I know I'm tired, because it used to be that I would wake up in the morning, my alarm would go off, and before I even allowed any thoughts to come into my mind, I would just be up and dressed and out. And then before I could even start having those conversations in my head of like, you don't really want to get up, do you? But I just can't seem to find my mojo to do that anymore. And I've been patient thinking it'll come, but it's just not coming.
So before you didn't really used to have to think about it, you just did it. But something's changing. Yeah.
And I don't know. I keep thinking like, was it sustainable what I was doing before? Like to train 8 times a week, is that sustainable? Do I really want to do that forever? Was I just doing that because I had, at the time, I was following a training plan for my running. So I knew that I had to get up and go. Otherwise, I might not be able to reach my goal at the end. So that kind of like was making me do that. But I also didn't want to lose my CrossFit. So, but now I haven't got that goal. I guess there's a bit more of a choice. And is it really an appropriate expectation of mine to say that I can work full time and train hard to run and train hard to do CrossFit? So I'm questioning that, I guess, maybe.
So you've got a bit of a dilemma by the sounds of it then. There's a part of you that would like to get that mojo back and do the heavy training routine that you were doing before when you had that goal.
Yeah.
And there's another side of you wondering if that's reasonable to be able to do that and fit in everything else you've got to in your life.
But I know, so when I am training hard, so as you know, like being a social worker and like the job that I do is quite emotionally and mentally draining. Like it takes a lot out of me. And so exercise is really important because that is my physical way of, I don't know, like getting rid of all of that. And so when I am exercising well and frequently, I feel really good. And I like the feeling that it gives me. I like having achy muscles. I like being able to have really content sleep because I'm physically exhausted as well as mentally. So I know it's really good for me to do, but I don't know why I'm not doing it.
So it's quite confusing for you working out what's going on at the moment.
It is. And I think that's probably why I wanted to talk to you about it today, because I genuinely don't know what my barrier is to just doing it.
Okay, so Sharron, let me just check I've understood you so far then. So you're always somebody that's taken exercise really seriously. It's been really important to you. Just lately you've noticed your motivation for doing as much exercise is starting to fall off a little bit. And it sounds like what you'd like to do is get back to feeling motivated to do the exercise.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think just for context, I suppose, before I trained to be a social worker, I didn't do any exercise at all. So it's only been in the last 6 years that I've exercised, and it's become quite an important thing in my life and has really helped to give me balance. And so I suppose I feel it's a bit unnerving
Not having it.
to not have it as fully as I had it before, when it's been such a constant stable throughout my social work career.
It's really helped you.
Yeah.
Tell me a bit more about that. You said balance. What do you mean?
Yeah. So in terms of so when I went to go and do my social work degree, I had no idea if I would be able to cut the mustard, if I would be able to reach that level of academic study and also then the grit, I suppose, of being a social worker and having the conflict and the complexity and all of the headspace that you needed to be a social worker and hold all of that. And so I threw myself into CrossFit because I wanted something that was equally as physically hard to give me that balance and that kind of like mental toughness versus physical toughness, to try and almost not cancel them out, but just to help me manage, I guess. And it really worked. I never, at school when I did exercise or like when my children were growing up, I never really felt that much from exercise. But when I was studying and then being a social worker, like I remember one of the most, as a newly qualified social worker, I shadowed somebody who needed to remove some children from a family, and it was the first time I'd ever gone through that. And it was obviously the right thing that we needed to do in that moment, but it was a horrific thing to experience. And what I did was I drove home and I got my running kit on and I ran, and and
that helped.
It really helped. And so I don't want to lose that mechanism that I've got.
Coping mechanism. So back when you were training to be a social worker, you know, the seed was sown for yourself then, by the sound of it, that you needed to be strong and you needed a way of coping with what was a very emotionally difficult job.
Yeah.
And you're slightly missing that.
Yes. And I think, and I suppose it worries me because if I lose that thread of exercise and that motivation, will that ultimately mean I can't do my job?
Bit of self-doubt that you can cope if you don't have the only coping mechanism that has worked for you. Yeah. So that must feel like a, difficult place to be right now.
Yeah, I don't really know. I don't know if it links with my change in role. So obviously before I was a frontline social worker where everything was really hardcore and busy and very, very stressful. And now as a consultant social worker, I'm kind of more of a thinker and more of a pauser and a reflector and an educator. So whether that like level of intensity has dropped in my working role and that has therefore dropped in my need to exercise, I don't know. But in my head, I still want to thrive in exercise. And at the moment, I don't feel like I'm thriving.
Yeah. So you can kind of think about it and find reasons for it. It feels clear to you, though, that it is something that you'd like to get back to. Yes,
I would. Yeah, I want to be able to get back to it. It's just knowing how I make that fit in my routine.
Okay. So, Sharron, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is not at all important and 10 is really important, how important is it for you to get back to the level of exercise you were doing before?
Well, it's bothering me probably more than I recognise. So I'd say it's probably about an 8.
About an 8. And what makes you choose an 8 and not, say, a 2? What gives it that level of importance?
Well, I guess for all of the things that I said before in terms of what it gives me and knowing that it's really helpful for me and that it's something I really enjoy. So
you've mentioned how it helps you cope with work. In what other ways is it helpful?
So I am less likely to argue with my husband. I can literally go into the gym feeling quite cross and frustrated and pent up about the world and just, I don't know, a bit grumpy, I guess. And then I will go in and I can do a workout or go for a really good run. Has to be a good run, not just a little run. And once I've finished, I feel lighter. I feel like I'm lifted. So it impacts on my mood for the whole of the rest of that day.
So it helps you not just in work, but also your daily life and in your relationship, you said.
Yes, yeah. And with the gym, I go to like training classes. So it's also a bit of a social life. So as I've got older, I can't drink so much alcohol, so I don't tend to go to the pub or anything anymore. So it is also a social outlet for me.
A way of mixing with like-minded people.
Yeah.
So, Sharron, can I ask you this? So on a scale this time where 1 is not very confident and 10 is really confident, how confident are you that you could get back to training as much as you did if you decided to?
Oh, I feel really confident that I could do it because I've done it before. I know that I can be really kind of religious about my training. Yeah, and disciplined about my my training schedule. So I would say I'd probably be a 9.
Okay. So the fact that you've done it before gives you a lot of confidence that if you did decide to, you could do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So if you did decide to, because we're not saying that you have, but let's say if you did decide to, what thoughts have you got about what would make you successful?
Well, I love a plan. So I definitely would, as I said before, I think the reason that I was following my running routine and then doing CrossFit was because I had a goal.
Oh.
And literally it would come up on my watch and would say, today's a run day, you need to do this. And and I almost didn't want to let my watch down because that's what I've committed to. So I think I would definitely need to have some time so that I could sit down and come up with a plan and a routine to make that possible.
So you know yourself well, and if you commit to something, you stick to it.
Yes.
So if you were to stick to a plan, if you were to make a plan, you know that you're going to stick to it.
Yes.
So what would that plan look like? Have you got a sense of what that would look like to be helpful?
Yeah, so I guess the times when I've fallen down with my planning, because I guess if it was that easy, I'd be doing it, right? So the times that it's fallen down is within my work now. We work from home a bit, we work in the office a bit, and sometimes that moves around. And so I like having a fixed plan. I like knowing that my run day is Sunday and that I go to the gym on these days of the week and I run on these days of the week. And so I can do that and that's fine. But then when I need to then be flexible with work, that is then the sticking point because then I might need to move it.
And that throws you.
And that throws me. So that's the bit that I probably need to be a bit more mindful about. And so maybe that takes a longer view of planning to make sure that I have, as much as I possibly could say, fixed days that I work. Because if I work from home, then I could run in the morning and I could go to the gym in the evening because I'd still have enough time, so I wouldn't need to do so much travelling. So maybe I need to try and marry those up a bit more.
You mentioned a longer view of the plan.
Yeah, so my planning tends to, although I might say I want to do this over the course of a month, I will look at a week. And it's a bit of a confession, I meal plan for the week. I have a table up on the fridge about where I'm going to be, what I'm going to do, what things we've got. And then I'll also diarise in where I think I'm going to run and where I think I'm going to go to the gym.
Yeah.
But I'm only doing that week by week. And maybe I need to look at it a longer and put into my work diary. These are the days that I am going to be home because then I'm less likely to put in things that require me to go into the office.
Right. So then you can almost sort of work around your training, your exercise, rather than the other way around.
Yes.
So you're someone that likes to feel in control of your life.
Yeah.
And you like to feel in control of your training.
Yes. Because if there's a moment for me, if there's some wiggle room for me to not train, I will exploit that. Whereas if it's very clear and I know exactly what I'm supposed to do, I will do it.
Okay. So let me just check then. So Sharron, training has always been important to you right back from when you trained to be a social worker. It was a way of coping and it's worked. You're missing it for those reasons by the sound of it, and you would like to get back to it. And you also talked about training hard. There's not, with you kind of any, any room to just do things half-heartedly.
No.
You want it to help you with sleep. You want it to help you to manage your emotions, your moods and your relationships. And it's part of a whole system really for you. It fits into this system of how you like to lead your life. And not doing it seems to have thrown you out a little bit, and you'd like to get back to it. If you did decide that that was something that you wanted to get back to, you feel really confident you could do that if you decided to. And you're starting to wonder about changing the way you plan your exercise so that the exercise takes a bit more prominence and doesn't get kind of kicked off when other things change.
Yeah. I think that's exactly right. I think I just need to put more thought into my planning, because I know I can do the exercise. Mm-hmm. I just can't seem to find the space for it, and that will come down to planning.
Okay. So if you did decide that you were going to look at your planning over a longer period of time, what's going to make it more likely that you actually do it?
This is such an insight into my life. I need to plan some time to plan. So, because I love a to-do list. Yeah. So if I've got it on my to-do list, even if it sits there for a couple of days, I'll then get so annoyed by it being on there that I will diarise some time to do it.
It will get to the top.
Yes.
So writing it down somewhere and having it as an action for yourself.
Yeah.
Planning time is more likely to happen.
Yes. Yeah.
So what are the things that might get in the way of you doing that, and how would you overcome them?
So me is one of the things that would get in the way, because I might think, I'll do that later, or I'll put that off, which is my fail-safe is to have my to-do list. So I think as long as I've got it on my to-do list, that would be fine. Because if I've got something that I've written down, that I tell myself that I've got to do it, I'll just do it. Mm-hmm. And I can't, I know that I have, let me think. So I could possibly do it this weekend, because I think that my husband and my child are out. So that would give me some time and no distraction to get that done.
So you're now thinking about when you might be able to do it, to not to just, so is that to put it on the list, or is that for it to be the planning time?
So in my mind, I've already put it on my list.
Oh, okay. It's on the list.
I've visualised my to-do list, which is at home on my office desk. And now I'm thinking, when can I diarise in that time?
Moved it forward a bit.
Yeah. Because if I don't identify that time, then it could slip, and I definitely don't want to leave it for too long, because otherwise it'll lose pace. It just
becomes words on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
So you're wondering about this weekend being a good time to start planning.
Yeah. Yeah. So that would be a good time for me to start kind of getting a routine in.
Bit of time off.
Because I've got some time off from work, so I could establish that, so that when I come back into work.
And keep it going.
Yeah.
So how likely is it you think that you're going to do the planning this weekend?
I think it's very likely, because that's part of the reason why I wanted to come and talk to you, because I knew that it's something that's been bothering me, and I just needed to kind of have a bit of clarity about what I'm going to do and how I'm going to get there. So definitely I think it's very likely that I'll do it this weekend.
Lovely. So it sounds like you've got a bit of a plan for this weekend.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sharron.
Thank you, Jackie.
Brilliant. Well, Sharron, Jackie, thank you so much for that. That was brilliant to kind of brilliant to observe it, but also just to kind of make the point that wasn't role playing, that you were having the genuine conversations about sort of genuine things within your life.
I know, because obviously I knew that I was coming today. I really did think hard about what it is that was something that was bothering me, because we've spoken before, that even though I know that the conversation that we've just had was obviously to feed in for this podcast, it still has, even though I know that, it still has a really positive effect. And I know that come the weekend, I will be planning. So, yeah, I selfishly thought, what do I need right now? And actually, that was something I needed to talk about.
Yeah. But
thanks,
the thing
Jackie.
is, that's what it's all about. And I think, to be honest, we when we talked about this, recording this, if you stage something, it becomes very staged. But actually, I think if you talk about something genuine, you can actually see it in practice.
Absolutely. And I think it illustrates all over again that we're all ambivalent about stuff. Otherwise, we'd have done everything. None of us would prevaricate. And but there's something really different about verbalizing things that go round and round in your head. It feels different, I think, to speak aloud what's going on. And if you like, as an MI practitioner, you're facilitating the person talking to themselves and not trying to get in their way. And I think a lot of what MI is learning to not get in people's way, but instead to kind of gently nudge the process forward.
So, Sharron, how did that feel for you to sort of go through that? And thank you for being so honest, so open about it.
It always feels good when I have a MI conversation. I suppose there's part of me that even before I have the conversation, because I know that I'm coming to talk about something that I am either ambivalent about or that I want to change, that process in my mind has already started. So it's almost like I'm playing a game in my head because I know what I need to do.
Yeah.
I just need to do it. But MI gives you that space to play around with your thoughts and your feelings about things. And can you do this? Can you do that? So I really value that space in being able to do that. So yeah, it felt really good.
And again, I think that what you've just said there is really important because most of the time, the people we're working with will also know what's in their best interests.
Yeah.
But it's easy to talk yourself out of change because change is hard. There's probably a bit of you that would like to just turn the alarm off and get back under the covers when it's still dark outside and stuff. So if I'd started trying to convince you, you need to do that and you argue against it. So it sort of sounds obvious. And I think that's kind of something we've talked about on this podcast before. It sounds so obvious. But I had somebody actually who came to one of the one-day courses actually. And she said, I came because I saw you at the Taunton racecourse, doing the very brief workshop. And she said, I can do that. That looks really easy.
Right.
And she said, I tried it and realised it wasn't easy. And I'm not blowing my own trumpet there. What I mean is it does sound like this is obvious, but there's so many other things that can come into our head when we're listening, which is like, well, have you thought about, getting an app? Have you thought, and the more we do that, it sort of gets in the person's way.
I think there's something about, because when we were going through that MI conversation and just picking up on what you're saying, Jackie, there's something about sitting in. So I notice that when I have an MI conversation with somebody, or when, Jackie, you were just talking to me then, there was no moment where I thought you're trying to move me on. And actually we were kind of hanging around in spaces for longer than other conversations might. So there's something about sitting in that place for a bit longer to kind of pull a bit more information out, elicit a bit more and ponder about what that really feels like to be in that situation.
Allowing the time for the person to process.
Yes.
We talked about that before, didn't we? That sort of instinct we have to fill that space, fill that gap and feel like, okay, there's a pause there, so I've got to do something within this space. Jackie, I'm just wondering, were you able to kind of talk us through sort of broadly the kind of process you just went through?
And please chip in, Sharron.
Okay.
So really at the start, with the engaging process, it's really just, which is approximately 20% of any conversation, just approximately. that really just listening to try and understand the person, where they're coming from. And obviously that's for the worker to understand, but crucially, it's for the person to understand themselves. And interestingly, sometimes that is just enough. The person listening to themselves talk aloud, you often get, even in a few short minutes, the person going, of course, it's obvious what I need to do. But what you're not doing in that engaging process is offering advice, trying to fix it for them, all of those things. So really it's that pure listening to understand. And then, just clarifying the focus, because that wasn't completely sort of obvious to me to start with, but then became a little bit clearer with I do want to get back to the training. Now, once I've got the shared collaboratively agreed focus with Sharron, now what I need to do is think about increasing motivation for the change, which is the evoking process. So that's really, I was picking up on some change talk there that I heard and asking Sharron what she meant, not for my benefit, for Sharron to become clearer about what she means. And then there was a tool I used, which was scaling, asking about the importance of the change and confidence about that. Should we just talk about that a bit? Because I was, what's really interesting is I really couldn't have predicted what you said.
So when I stopped, when you asked me that question, so obviously I knew I was coming to talk about what I talked about. I hadn't thought about the tools that you might use and the scaling options. And so I just thought in the moment about, I know that when I am fully on board with something, I will 100% do it. And so I don't doubt that part of me. It's just the getting to that part. Decision. So in terms of my confidence about pulling something off and doing it, yeah, I felt all right about that.
That's really interesting, because if I hadn't done that, I could have assumed your confidence was lower, because like a lot of people do, and it's a bit of a red herring actually, when people say, I just need to understand why I'm not doing it. So in MI, we need to be really cautious there about saying, well, why do you think you're not doing it? Because then, of course, what I'm eliciting is sustained talk, reasons not to do it. So I'm going to not ask you about that until a bit later in the planning process. Because can you see how you could easily then start to hear yourself? And if we're thinking MI is all about the verbalization of either change talk or sustained talk, I want to elicit change talk from you. So in a way, I'm ignoring you saying, I just need to understand why I'm not doing it. And instead asking you the equivalent of, well, what might the benefits be if you did?
And I'll tell you what was interesting actually for me observing it in that point you were talking about is in our first episode, we kind of touched on the sort of difference between MI and sort of coaching, for example. And I was thinking actually at that point, as you were just talking about it, within that coaching model, probably at that point you'll be looking at, okay, so what are the barriers that are stopping you from doing that?
Yeah.
And how can you then overcome those barriers?
Yes.
And like you say, you didn't approach that. You didn't go down that route.
No.
And I guess that's kind of a really good definition of what example of what that difference is.
How it's different. And that's a crucial difference is it's not that we would never ask about that in MI, but you've got to be, especially if you're a beginner, be really careful that that's a rabbit hole that you can get yourself down really easily. And if you think about why you're doing that, if you ask about the barriers and you're going to elicit sustained talk, how are you going to get yourself out of that hole? Because what will happen usually is as we're asking for barriers, the fixing reflex pops up and we start trying to fix the barriers. And now you're not doing MI, are you? So it's just being really mindful that I've had this on training very interestingly quite a few times where somebody presents the change as, I just need to understand why I'm not doing this. But that's the red herring. And we need to find the focus, which might be, let's say the focus might be doing more exercise. the focus isn't, why aren't I doing the exercise? And it's being really clear with the person what the focus is. I hope I haven't been too confusing.
No, and I think the other thing was interesting sort of observing that is that I kind of felt like there was a risk that 3/4 of the way through that, it was like, oh, okay, great, we're there.
Yeah.
We've done it. We're there. We've cracked it. You've identified it. Here we go. But actually that wasn't the end of that process. And I know normally, as we talked about, you wouldn't necessarily go right into action planning as we did today, but actually
it felt appropriate.
It felt appropriate, yeah. But also I think that you could have potentially thought, okay, great, we're there, 3/4 of the way through, we're there, job done, happy days. But actually you kind of progressed that. That's when we sort of talked a bit more about the scaling and...
Yeah, so often if we're thinking of the 4 processes of MI, evoking and planning often start to merge a bit. So you're moving from the why to the how. And actually you were starting to think about the how. So I was kind of, if you like, going with Sharron's lead. But then it's time to start kind of cementing it, if you like, building that commitment to the plan. If you like, you know, I think I asked something like, what's going to make it more likely that you do that? And just really getting you to think about maybe barriers at that point, but only when it sounds like the decision's been made, that the person actually wants the change. Then you might say, what might the barriers be and how might you overcome them? Not just what's going to get in your way.
And the summarising there at the end as well. Really sort of pulling it all together.
What was that like, Sharron?
Well, I really enjoyed it.
Was that the summary?
Yeah, I did really enjoy it because it just, it kind of like solidified, like brought everything together of the whole conversation and why this is important to me, why we've just spent that time to have that conversation and what I feel I would like to take from this conversation and move forward. And just going back to the point on the planning, I literally, because I don't know that I've been through an MI conversation where we've done planning to that degree before. And I genuinely did visualise my to-do list at home and I could see that being written on the note.
Yeah, I could see from your eyes that you were picturing it.
Yeah, which then made me think about the plans. And so that was really powerful because that's like, that conversation tapped into all of the little things that I do to make things happen in my life. So that was, really personal and powerful.
So that envisioning was something I think we could both see Sharron doing that. And it's paying attention as the listener to that and just sort of noticing and going with that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for coming in and doing that today. I think it's been brilliant to actually see it, like I say, put into practice and what that can actually look like. And I think the point you both made at the start is this is something that takes practice, takes a bit of time. But hopefully we've been able to demonstrate a little bit about actually how it does actually work.
I hope so.
Thank you so much. It's been brilliant having you both in. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Well, I hope that today's episode has really helped to demonstrate MI in practice and bring alive some of the things that Jackie's been talking to us about in her previous episodes. Just a reminder, if this has sparked your enthusiasm to find out more, then Jackie is running the one-day Introduction to Motivational Interviewing course, which is fully subsidised for all Somerset agencies. That's available to everybody except for colleagues from Children's Social Care who undertake more intensive 3-day MI training with Jackie. You can book your free space now through the SSCP training page, and to make it even easier to find, I've included a link in the training in the episode description. So if you have any questions or comments arising from today's episode, or would like to be involved in future episodes, we'd love you to get in touch with us at theppod@somerset.gov.uk. My thanks once again to my guest today, Jackie Webb, Motivational Interviewing Trainer, for allowing us to put her on the spot and run a live demonstration. And of course, to Sharron Ricketts, Consultant Social Worker, who was willing to share quite personal details with us to help bring alive MI in practice. My thanks as well, as always, to you for listening. My name is Steve Maccabee, and I'm the Multi-Agency Training Manager for the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. And I look forward to you joining us again next time at the ThePPod.
Let's work together to help keep children safe.